I've had so many discussions with Israeli friends over this. And every time they say we might be going to war with Lebanon, I say, but what's the end line? What's the goal? I mean, and then they say we push Hezbollah to Litani. I said, but how do we know who's Hezbollah? This is the biggest problem. Hezbollah's never in military formation. They're never dressed in military uniform. So Hezbollah are civilians.
Welcome back to The Common Denominator. I'm Ilana Rachel Daniel. As the terrorists of the world remain emboldened and undeterred, the drums of war blare on every channel without respite. We learned last week and in previous episodes the nature of these manufacturers of chaos, rooted in the trunk of Iran, with branches ready for combat reaching out across the Middle East and into the world at large. Hezbollah, the crown jewel in the Islamic Republic of Iran's defense, sits at Israel's north and continues to rain terror on civilians, reaching deeper and deeper into Israel by the day and increasing their threats of terrible war. We learned of who is Hezbollah, just as we have learned who is the Islamic Republic. And we learned that no less than 80% of 90 million Iranians despise the regime that stamps out their own culture. But who is Lebanon? And does Hezbollah hold a parasitic relationship with it comparable to that of Iran before it? Today, we are delighted to sit for a discussion with Hussain Abdul Hussain. He's a research fellow at FDD, focuses on the Gulf region and Yemen, including on Gulf relations with Iran and Gulf peace with Israel. He was born and raised in Beirut, Baghdad, and Baalbek, cities that have been the theater of major Middle Eastern events. Hussain earned a degree in History and Archeology from the American University of Beirut, after which he worked as a reporter and later managing editor at Beirut's The Daily Star. He reported from war zones on the Lebanese border with Israel and from Iraq. In Washington, Hussain helped set up and manage the Arabic satellite network Alhurra Iraq, after which he headed the Washington Bureau of Kuwaiti daily Alrai. Hussain has worked as a visiting fellow with London's Chatham House and has published in English in the New York Times, the Washington Post, and in Arabic in various publications. His analysis has been quoted by Vox, the Jerusalem Post, and Newsweek. Hussain has appeared on CNN and MSNBC and is a frequent commentator on major Arabic satellite networks. Hussain, at long last, it's our pleasure to have you here today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on.
Hussain, let's start off with you, please. Anything that you want to share. Tell me of your younger years, your trajectory between Beirut, Baghdad, and Baalbek. How did you grow up? What was the environment that surrounded you and the rhetoric of the day, your personal trajectory within the greater background of the societies you grew up in?
Well, sure. My story is just like any other family in the region. I'm half Lebanese, half Iraqi. And we just spent our time going between these two countries trying to flee war. Now, unfortunately, these are the two most troubled, war-ridden countries in the region. In 1982, my family moved from Iraq to Lebanon almost permanently, where I stayed most of my life until I moved to the US. And in these over 20 years, I survived the Lebanese Civil War, and I was lucky to also live throughout the brief period of prosperity that Lebanon witnessed after the Civil War. Now, unfortunately, these did not last for long, but by that time, I was here. And like many of my peers, I was an activist in student politics. I ran and served on the student government, was the editor-in-chief of the student newspaper. And after college, I was still an activist, what we call the youth activism, and I was on the secular left-wing side of things. But our thinking was pretty similar to what many of us still think today. Now, just keep in mind that the Lebanese Civil War started because Lebanon was divided along the lines of the Palestinian cause. So in 1970, when Jordan kicked out the Palestinian armed militias, they relocated to Lebanon and started waging attacks from Lebanon across the border with Israel. And this invited Israeli reaction. And this reaction started undermining what was until then a very prosperous and stable Lebanon. Uh, a big part of the Lebanese, mainly the Christians, but not exclusively the Christians, said, okay, we are destroying our country for another country that's not ours. So, we support the Palestinians. We like them. We want them to have the best of life. But this is not a way to help them or show solidarity. And over this fault line, the Lebanese civil war was fought between 1975 and 1990. And when the civil war ended in 1990, it was ended on the premise that Lebanon had gotten out of the military fight for the Palestinians. So it was, okay, now we're not fighting for Palestinians anymore. We still show solidarity, whether in diplomatic arenas or elsewhere, for the Palestinians, but we are not fighting Israel for the sake of Palestinians. Now, there was a caveat over here. It's that Israel at the time was still in South Lebanon, and it took Israel another 10 years to withdraw. In 2000, Israel withdrew. Lebanon signed on the border that they call the Blue Line, and this completed the process of withdrawal as stipulated by UN Resolution 425. So after the year 2000, this whole resistance to kick Israel out of Lebanon, even this had no reason to stay anymore. So after the year 2000, Hezbollah itself had a raison d'etre crisis. They were not sure why they existed anymore. And when the Lebanese asked them to disarm, because Israel was clearly gone and Lebanon was all free and independent, Hezbollah tried to come up with excuses such as this border spot with Israel, the Sheba Farms, Har Dov, or some other spot, but these were never convincing. Now, unfortunately, since that time until today, Hezbollah has completely taken over the state, all of it. There's no president. The prime minister is an acting prime minister. The state is run down. There's no electricity. The electricity supply is 3 hours every 24 hours. No water. The country is in shambles, and Hezbollah is in charge. Now, since this became the case, what we saw on October 8th was that this was the first time when Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah went on cameras, which that's how he rules Lebanon anyway. He delivers a speech every week or so, and he says this is what we're doing, and no one can argue with it. But Hezbollah went on camera and he said, we just started war on Israel, and that's because we want to pin down Israeli forces in the north, and this will be a lot of support to Hamas and Gaza in the south. And this is against everything that led to the end of the Lebanese civil war. The Lebanese had agreed on the idea that we are not fighting Israel for the sake of Palestinians. Starting October 8th, Nasrallah single-handedly changed this, and no one can say otherwise, because clearly the Hezbollah rules Lebanon with fire and fury. It's just a tyrannical force with lots of arms and intelligence, and it has squeezed out, ejected, killed, assassinated anyone who opposes its policies and ideas. So this is where we are now, and there are very few voices, dissenting voices, that are speaking out against Hezbollah. The ones who live outside of Lebanon, like myself, are clearly louder, but there are still brave Lebanese who still live inside Lebanon, who are saying what I'm saying, that this is not our war, and whatever is the case of the Palestinians, even if we assume that they're suffering total and extreme injustice at the hands of Israel, this does not mean that we should fight a war for them. So this is the Lebanese position, and this is, by the way, the position of the majority of the Lebanese, because Hezbollah gets the support of the Shia, which is 1/3 of the Lebanese population. And even within the Shia of Lebanon, and I was born Shia, even within the Shia of Lebanon, there's division over, fighting this war and going to war with Israel. But it's hush hush. So, and my inbox is jammed. My WhatsApp is busy all the time with friends, cousins, family, people I grew up with who are saying all the time that we disagree, but we can't say it out loud for fear of social shaming or physical threats.
Well, this is something I'd wanted to say for the end, but the truth is it's the most human aspect because, of course, we're sitting here in Israel terrified of war because everyone understands the nature of this. Everyone understands this was the worry on October 8th, right? Was what thread would this unravel? And I guess the question is, and I have also understanding, a basic logical understanding. And also I've heard you speak. I understand to an outsider's view of the degree of intimidation for speaking anything but the company line. But at what point is there any hope for the people? You have people held hostage by just a rotten very few, by what you're saying here in Lebanon. And again, I compare it to Iran. At what point is it unreasonable to expect or to hope that this quiet, suppressed few who understands the nature of what could unfold, is there any way of them gathering together a group of people and demanding? I mean, is it just complete naivety? Is this just the way of the world that one bully can cause so much harm to hundreds of thousands, millions of others?
So we didn't get here by chance. This has been a process. Hezbollah didn't take over Lebanon overnight.
Right.
And this process started after the year 2000. Late Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, he was, the man who led reconstruction after the Civil War, a very enlightened man. And after the year 2000, he went to Nasrallah and said, listen, it's time for us to build the country. Let's come up with a face-saving idea for you, and wherein you can keep the arms but never go to war with Israel. And let us focus on building the economy, building the country, creating jobs. Lebanon is has the biggest pool of skilled labor and human resources in the region. It has probably the biggest diaspora. Its remittances is among the top, maybe right after Egypt, but on a per capita basis, it would be much higher. So Hariri thought, since we have these strong elements, let's make something that looks like Dubai today. And this didn't go well with Nasrallah, and they killed Hariri. There's a UN tribunal that shows that Hezbollah assassinated Hariri in February 14, 2005. And the killing of Hariri provoked some sort of a revolution, an uprising that ejected the forces of Assad, who were still in Lebanon since 1976. So they ejected the forces of Assad, and Hezbollah was on the back foot. And the country seemed moving in the direction where it was going toward democracy and maybe peace with Israel. Good things were to happen. And in Lebanon at the time, this is 2005, they were relying on the Bush administration, which is spreading democracy in the region. Now, unfortunately, by 2008, America had grown tired of the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, and changed course. And when this happened, America threw the supporters of democracy and peace under the bus. And in 2008, Hezbollah literally invaded in terms of, sent its military. It invaded the territories of its rivals, the Druze in Mount Lebanon. They threatened Walid Jumblat, the leader of the Druze. The Sunnis in Beirut, they threatened Hariri, the son of the prime minister, the leader of the Sunnis, and so on. And at the time, the Bush administration instructed these guys to talk to Hezbollah, reason with Hezbollah and try to share the country. And these people had to concede. They had no other support. Hezbollah was much stronger than them. It could kill all of them. So they conceded. They shared with Hezbollah. And since that time, this sharing has turned into Hezbollah took it all. So you see that there's an American inconsistency in
Yeah.
supporting democracy and Democrats, whether these Democrats are Lebanese dissidents and opponents to Hezbollah, or whether it's Israel, or even whether it's the UAE or Saudi Arabia versus Iran. So this US inconsistency is just killing everyone. And this is not a strategy. This is not a foreign policy. I know I live in Washington, and I know that this administration believes that this is a foreign policy strategy and that they're smart, and and they call it something de-escalation and integration. They give it all these big words, but in fact, it's not a policy. It's crisis management. They just show up and say, okay, look, love each other, talk to one another. But these guys don't want to love us. The Hezbollah, they don't want to love the other Lebanese. Hamas, they don't want to love Israelis. They want to fight and kill. And this is what Iran is there for. This is why Islamist Iran is arming all of these guys. They live for war. They are defined by war and killing. So what the Lebanese suffered 10, 15 years ago, the Israelis are suffering today. The Yemenis suffered after 2009. The Iraqis also suffered after 2012, and so on and so forth. Unless we have a comprehensive way to deal with this, to enlist big powers like the United States to support democracy and Democrats, I don't see how the Lebanese can get out of this. Honestly, Israel is the last man standing in the region, fighting for its own life, and trying to push back against Iran, Hamas, Houthis, Hezbollah, the militias in Iraq. I think Jordan is in the crosshairs of these militias. So Jordan is under great danger today. I'm sure that the Iranians have their schemes to replace the king with militias, or at least to have militias next to the king and eventually dominate the king. Syria is gone. It's under the control of the militias of Iran. So this is something that's spreading, and all what you see is, one more conference somewhere in some city, or a meeting in Paris between Hezbollah and the French and the US envoy to try to stave off war. Even if we manage to de-escalate this month or this year or next year, in 2 years from now, Hezbollah will come back much stronger.
Right. That's exactly there's so much to unpack with that, because that's exactly the point. The bitter disappointment to Israelis right now is, how did we not deal with this 10 years ago, 20 years ago? How do we allow them to build an arsenal and become so strong that they are an existential crisis to this country? And it's exactly, and I really wonder, there's quite a few things to say, but in your most honest, forthright opinion, why does America behave this way when they are not stupid? The idea of appeasement has never worked. They've got plenty of research to tell them so. Why do they behave in this manner?
Well, to my mind, there are several reasons. Number one, the American interest in foreign policy is really very low. I wouldn't say more than 5-10% follow on foreign policy issues. And this allows the ideological ones to get away with experiments that are only academic, and that they can't live in the real life like this. And I know Anthony Blinken from way before he became Secretary of State. He was a think tanker, just one of us, and most of these guys who are with him were the same, and they came up with ideas. At the time, before Susan Rice became who she became later under the Obama administration. All these people, when they were think tankers, they came up with ideas that we challenged, and we said they don't work. And at the time, if you remember, there was the idea of the grand bargain with Iran, that the Iran regime is reasonable, and that if we offer them big contracts and money and business, and they'll become preoccupied with making money, and then they'll stop fighting. And what Iran did was that they took the money to fund their fighting. So, but we're on the record. I'm on the record arguing with Anthony Blinken at one of the DC think tanks at the time, when they decided to take the side of Maliki, who was Iran's guy in Iraq as prime minister, at the expense of Alawi, he got the highest number of seats in parliament. That was, the worst terrible idea that Washington could come up with. And Blinken at the time argued that we needed to edge the Iranian oil out of the market, so we need the Iraqi oil, so we need Maliki. And my point was that even if a stick becomes the prime minister of Iraq, this stick will be dying to export oil because this is how the Iraqi state lives. I mean, that's their only revenue. Anyway, long story short, a lot of the ideas that are put forward by mainly the democratic administrations are academic and imaginary and never been tested. And whenever they were tested, they failed. And this is something that I say to many people over here, especially the Arab Americans. And, I have the idea that Arab Americans are not really Arab. So I'm Arab and I'm a naturalized American citizen. Arab Americans who were born here are a different breed. Their ideas are American. They talk about identity politics. They are so off the mark. They are so unrealistic that they think that LGBTQ can go with Hamas. And I put this here just to make my case how this doesn't make sense. But they are not aware that even if Israel disappears right this moment, what do you think will happen? There'll be Palestine where everyone is taking out the violin and playing love songs? No, there'll be civil war, no electricity, assassinations, and whatever you see in Lebanon and Syria. So the Arab American hybrid over here gets it wrong. And they probably think that they have to be loyal, but they confuse loyalty to the culture and the region with loyalty to Hamas and the Islamist Iran. And the same applies to many Iranian Americans. I mean, I understand Iran is a great civilization. I love the Iranian culture, their cuisine and language and everything. This does not mean that I take the side of the Islamist Iranian regime. So these communities here in the US have formed pressure groups that are forcing the Democrats to go in this imaginary direction of, the global South taking over, or appeasement, or let's talk to Iran, or let's talk to Russia, and anyone like us, like me, anyone who grew up in that part of the world, know that this does not work. Just go spend a few years living anywhere in the Middle East, and you'd instantly realize, a student at Columbia who was, at the press conference with a kufiya around his neck, and shouting for Hamas and Palestine and whatnot, and he was standing there in a crop top, and I thought this guy wouldn't last 10 minutes in Amman or in Damascus, let alone Gaza. So that's how unrealistic things are, and it's unfortunate that Blinken and these guys, and I love them. They're all honest people, but they're unrealistic, and they try to sound professorial, but they're not, and they've got it wrong.
They got it wrong, and they also have the proof that they've got it wrong. So at some point, the fact that they don't change course is, and even now when it's come, best friends over here, Israel and America, it's more than alarming, and it really makes you question. It makes you question the motives behind, because all the evidence is there. You want to try an experiment, you tried it. You already mentioned Lebanon, Iraq. It's already been done half a dozen times, and now at Israel's door, on every corner. It's hard to imagine. It's hard to continue to see the good intention behind that. I want to talk about some of the things that you mentioned specifically. So actually, let's go ahead with talk about what you opened with, speaking about when Israel did invade Lebanon in 1982, and that it was to oust the PLO. As you said, there was already cross-border violence. So it's also worth noting that 15 years of civil war, 150,000 people died in just 15 years. And so during that time where it was fighting in Beirut and then beyond, I want to hear from you a little bit more specifically about the role that the PLO did play in the civil war and the impact of the PLO on Lebanon as a whole.
Well, so I mean, I think everyone agrees that the role of the PLO was destructive. And by the way, even after Israel invaded, what eventually topped the balance and changed things was that the supporters of the PLO, the Sunni and the Druze, came together and they asked Arafat to leave. Otherwise, Arafat was willing to do what Hamas is doing now: just let everyone die, let every building be razed down, and I'll be just sitting in one of my tunnels or underground bunkers. And Walid Jumblat and the Sunni leadership at the time met at the house of former Prime Minister Saib Salam in Beirut, in Saitbe, and they asked him. They said, "Listen, this is something we can't take anymore." And this is what tipped the balance. I've been waiting for a similar thing to happen among the Palestinians. I mean, not necessarily the ones who are living in Gaza, maybe the ones who are living in the West Bank. Just I see a few voices, but just be straightforward. I know that you hate Israel, but you must love your own people more than you hate Israel. I mean, right? I mean, if all of these Palestinians are dying, what's your plan? Just keep on shaming Israel and hope that the world will delegitimize the Jewish state and make it, disappear? Fine, but this is not happening soon. What's your plan for the coming 3 months or 6 months? So along these lines, where the PLO was, that's what they were doing in Lebanon. And by the way, they might seem as if they were ideological, the PLO and all these Palestinian militias. They were not. And you will see that the same thing is happening in the West Bank and Gaza. By the way, when October 7 happened and the war in Gaza started, the first thing I did was that I went back and read the literature that I have on the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And you'll be amazed the number of similarities between back then and today, including the behavior of Washington. I mean, even the Reagan administration turned against Israel at the time. And eventually, Israel turned out to be right and prevailed, and the PLO was ejected. But to go back to what the Palestinians were doing at the time, they looked as if they were principled in liberating Palestine, quote unquote, but they were a bunch of mercenaries. Saddam had his faction, Gaddafi had his faction, Assad had his faction. More often than not, they were gunning down one another like they did in 2007 in Gaza, when Hamas killed 350 Palestinian Authority and Fatah people and threw them out of the Strip. So these guys were fighting one another in Lebanon and across the Arab countries more than they were fighting Israelis or anybody else. And while they did that, they also groomed Lebanese fighters and young men to join them. So, and this is where it got interesting, because all the leadership that eventually became the leadership of Hezbollah was actually groomed by Abu Jihad, the second of command of Arafat at the time. Maghniye, Anis Na'ash, Carlos the Jackal, any terrorist you can think of. All of these guys were put together by Abu Jihad. And to the extent that when Khomeini was, when he started taking over in Iran, Khomeini had to rely on Arafat and Abu Jihad to train what we know today as the IRGC, because Khomeini was scared that the military might launch a counter coup and knock him out and bring back the royals. So what Khomeini did was that he created this IRGC, the militia that's still in power today, to offset the army. Now, the army, the Artesh today in Iran is still very weak. And the powerful party that supports the regime is the militia. And this is the model that got replicated in Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and they hope soon Syria, where you have a militia that's the actual force, and the militia pledges allegiance to Khamenei or Nasrallah. And then you have a state that's really, just a figurehead with an irrelevant army. So all of this started with Arafat. The minute when the Arab world allowed for militias to run their lives was what got us here. And this started now, unfortunately, this started this way, but this started when Nasser was defeated in front of Israel in 1967. He became too weak, and he had to rely, or he had to give space actually to the militias. And this was the time when militias started, surging in terms of, okay, if the states can get us Palestine back, then the militias will get us the Palestine back. Now, the Lebanese government at the time pushed back, and they said, no, we value our state and we to keep it, but they were overruled by the big Arab governments. The only government, to my mind, that was smart enough to see this was King Hussein of Jordan. He said, no, that's a line I'm drawing. Even if I'm, getting help from Israel, I'm going to go get help from Golda Meir to help me eject these Palestinians and protect the sovereignty of the state and maintain it, which is still alive today. Otherwise, Jordan would have been just like Lebanon, a lawless territory where militias are dominating. So this is the legacy of the PLO in Lebanon. And by the way, all the Lebanese know this. I mean, it's not like there's another faction of Lebanese, or even the pro-Hezbollah Lebanese didn't like the Palestinians at the time. And there are stories of the Shia in the south going to rounds of fighting, endless fighting. By the way, after Israel withdrew from Beirut, there was in Lebanon what we called at the time the siege of the camps. And these were the Shia fighters of the Amal militia at the time, who besieged the camps and who were fighting with the Palestinian militias all the time. So just keep that in mind. It's not like all of this Palestine thing is an excuse for Hezbollah to maintain its arms. They don't really like the Palestinians. They're not really willing to do anything serious. By the way, if you are Shia, or if you grew up Shia, anyone who grew up Shia knows this. There's not a single Palestinian Shia before 1985, say, or there's not a single spot that the Shia consider to be holy throughout the land from the river to the sea. And I grew up with these ideas. I mean, my grandma used to tell me this. Palestine is a Sunni issue. It's not ours. It's Nasser. We don't like these guys. So after 1979, Khomeini changed all of this. He came up with the idea, this is, for all of Islam, and we're going to. But Khomeini did this only to take over with the Sunnis, to attract the Sunnis to his cause, to say, okay, we're going to fight, and you guys are lining up behind me because I'm fighting your war. But look, I mean, trust me, at least half of the Lebanese, at least half of the Shia across the world do not support this, totally oppose this. They can't say it, but they totally oppose it.
It's very powerful what you're saying. And I want to illustrate just for a second the population in Lebanon, because a lot has been discussed about the sectarian divides. But actually, there's been no official census of the population since 1932. So I'll just break it down for people. It's estimated that 30% of Lebanon is Christian, mainly Maronite Catholics, followed by Greek Orthodox. And 69% of the country are Muslim, about 31% Sunni, 32% Shia, and 6% Alawites, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And the system in Lebanon is that the president must be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of parliament a Shiite Muslim. So anything you want to add about those pieces fitting together, facing this challenge? I think you've mainly discussed that. But, again, you already, just to put a emphasis on the fact, there's no president right now. Hezbollah has taken over. Again, it's like it's this invasive species. It is a parasite. And I think one of the most alarming things about what you've described, so when you think about the methodology of human shields, when we're already talking about the use of that with Hamas in Gaza, the idea of using the majority of the Lebanese as human shields, because what do they care? If their mission is 100% just the destruction of Israel first, and again, only Israel first, because America is the big Satan, right? The big Satan. So you're talking about a ruling terrorist power that has Zero care. That's, I think, one of the greatest concerns in this war is not only the artillery and the chest beating, but it's the fact that we want to protect civilians in Israel, and I'm not sure that they care whatsoever.
So yes, just first let me correct that the Alawites can't be 6% of Lebanon. They're probably 1 or 2%.
Okay.
Alawites are a big faction in Syria. They're probably 25 or 30% of the population. I'm not sure about the Syrian numbers. There's no census in Lebanon, but there's a way to calculate these numbers. Is that the election registry gets updated regularly. So every time you go to election, you can tell the number of people that you have on your list. And these lists tell us that the Sunnis are the biggest faction, 31, 30, I think 33%. Then the Shia, less by 50,000 people. And then all the Christians at 35%, something. And you have a significant number of Druze. I think there are probably 200,000 Druze who live there. Now that's, just a quick note about the sects before we move to the hostages situation. There are Druze in Israel. They're Israeli citizens, and there are very small minority of Alawites. These are the ones from the Golan Heights on this very border that the Hezbollah claims to be Lebanese. The Ghajar village, it has Alawites. This is a village that Israel took in 1967 and that Lebanon never claimed to be its own until after 2000 when Hezbollah wanted an excuse to fight with Israel over. But these Alawites who are now Israeli citizens, it was really surprising to me because the other day I was watching their some footage from Ghajar and from the Druze of Israel. Now this is what you can see. The Druze in Israel and the Alawites in Israel are more open about their ideas and ideologies and teachings than they are in Lebanon and Syria. Even though in Syria the Alawites are the rulers, Assad is Alawite, so Alawites are the main power, but they behave as if they're Sunni or Shia. They practice dissimulation. This is a historic issue. It didn't start now. So over the past 1,000 years, the Druze and the Alawites were always scared of Muslim repression. So they came up with the idea that outside they behave as if whoever is in power. They behave they're Sunni, they behave they're Shia, but they keep their teachings secret. So the Alawis in Syria, they're still practicing this. And the Druze in Lebanon, to an extent, they're still practicing this. And when there was a surge of, in ISIS, Walid Jumblat, the leader of the Druze in Lebanon, constructed a mosque in his own hometown of Mukhtara to prove that the Druze were actually Muslims. He was scared that these crazy Islamists would come after the Druze because they're not Muslims. So this is how much fear these people live in. Now look up any footage of the Druze who live in Israel, and you'll see them out and about. You can tell where's Maqam al-Nabi Shu'aib, you can tell, where when they celebrate, you can tell where Maqam Sayyidina Khudr, all these things. I was amazed. And if you look at the Ghajar, you will see that there's a statue in the middle of the town square of Ali bin Abi Talib, which, the Alawites revere. And this is something that you can never find in Latakia and in the heartland of the Alawites of Syria. So even if you look at these sects, they're enjoying much more freedom of expression of their own ideology and, expressing pride in their beliefs than they can in countries where they rule them. Yeah. Now to your question about how Hezbollah takes these all these sects that oppose it, including the Shia, at least, one half of the Shia as hostages. Do you know that whenever there's a rumor of war in Lebanon, of course, like everybody else, the Lebanese start moving around. They're trying to find safe spots. Do you know how they measure the safe spots? They measure them based on the assumption that Israel is humane, that Israel will not target spots that do not have Hezbollah, that Israel only targets what Israel cares about, that Israel will go after either it's PLO or Hezbollah or some sort of arms depot, weapons, something. So this is how the Lebanese decide their own safety. And now, as we speak, and after seeing what has happened in Gaza, many Lebanese are scared that there's probably no safe place in Lebanon. No one knows where Hezbollah has dug tunnels or stored arms, or if one missile, if one rocket flies to Israel from the Christian enclave, then this Christian enclave will be under threat of reprisal from Israel. So the Lebanese are scared. I mean, they know that there are certain neighborhoods in Beirut that there are no Shia or Hezbollah. The Druze areas in Mount Lebanon, the Christian area to the east. I mean, they know these things, but now they're not sure because Hezbollah is just controlling the country. You have no. I mean, if Hezbollah has rockets underneath the airport, then where else does it have rockets? No one knows. So this issue that they have, and this takes us back to Gaza. Gaza is just a tiny area, and Hamas just, they barricaded themselves underneath everything. By the way, there are UN reports from long before October 7 that prove that Hamas launched rockets from underneath UNRWA schools, either from underneath the school or from within the school premises or from very nearby the school fence. But these are way before October 7. These things were out there, the reports, and they're still on there for anyone who wants to look them up. So this is how these organizations work. And which brings me to the idea that, I've had so many discussions with Israeli friends over this. And every time they say we might be going to war with Lebanon, I say, but what's the end line? What's the goal? I mean, and then they say we push Hezbollah to Litani. I said, but how do we know who's Hezbollah? This is the biggest problem. Hezbollah is never in military formation. They're never dressed in military uniform. So Hezbollah are civilians. I mean, unless Israel manages to push every Lebanese civilian north of the Litani, which is like an enormous number of people, unless you push just everyone to the north of Litani, you can never guess who's Hezbollah and who's not. So I mean, to me this seems hard. To me, it seems if Israel goes to war with Lebanon, it'll be like they used to say in Gaza, this is one round of mowing the lawn, right? I mean, you buy yourself 5 years of calm, 10 years of calm, and then after that, Hezbollah will come back at you. Yeah. But this is what it is. And unless you enlist the superpower, the main powers of the world to come up with a comprehensive solution for the Iran regime, the Islamist regime of Iran, and for these militias, all what Israel can do is just defend itself and push these things back, these bad guys back. But to think that Israel really has the solution to go in and comprehensively uproot Hezbollah, or I wish it would have been the case. Don't get me wrong. I'm the last person to defend Hezbollah, but short of the Lebanese just participating in ejecting Hezbollah and throwing rocks at them and pushing them out of the windows and the balconies. I mean, short of the Lebanese doing that, I don't see a comprehensive solution. The same thing we saw happening in Gaza. Look, I see footage all the time by private phones of Gazans saying that we hate Hamas and that we want them done and out. Now, how many of those are willing to organize against Hamas? I haven't seen any. And the same applies to Lebanon. So all these sects, I mean, I know for a fact that at least 80% of Christian Maronites are totally opposed to Hezbollah. I know for a fact that over 90% of the Druze of Lebanon are totally opposed to Hezbollah. Right? 70% of the Sunnis, 60% of the Shia. There's no way Hezbollah can win any referendum it holds in Lebanon, a free referendum. There's no way Hezbollah can win a free election. And they've lost elections, by the way. In 2009, they were beaten. In 2014, they were beaten. In the last round, 2021, I think, they also couldn't win the majority. In Iraq, the militias of Iran were beaten hard. The Shia of Iraq voted against Hezbollah and the militias. And the US, never came to their support. We just let them. Yeah, I mean, they won the election, but then Iran forced them to resign. So the winners resigned, and now all the parliament that you see, the majority of parliament that you see in Iraq, were the people who lost the election. Just check it out. This is crazy, right? I mean, a parliament with a majority who lost the election, but they are sitting in parliament. So this is surreal. What I'm trying to say here is that the tools that I have, my connection to these countries, I know for a fact that Iran and its militias do not have the majority, but they just beat everyone, and they look as if they do.
Do you have any realistic hope? First of all, it's interesting. I'm assuming that the EU will only act if the United States acts, because they also have. Well, I mean, listen, they're not ready for war. But is there any realistic hope that America will gather forces and make it happen at the last minute? Do you have any confidence in that? In the West,
on Lebanon or on Lebanon or Iran, or
because this is not just Israel's war, and everyone knows it. Everyone knows that Israel isn't fighting Hamas. Well, first of all, we're not fighting Gaza; we're fighting Hamas, and everybody knows Hamas is one branch and the weakest one of the Islamic regime of Iran's tentacles. We're fighting Iran. Iran hates the West. It's no joke. It's foolish to think our little country of 9 million people, size of New Jersey, could do this on our own. If this is everyone's fight, come on, get in there. Because there is no tomorrow. As much as I am terrified as a human being, and as much as I want to just worry about all the daily life matters that I should be focused on, I'm under zero illusion that even if this is put off, as much as I want this war put off, I have no illusions that in 2 years' time, in 5 years' time, I'm dealing with a monster that's got exponentially greater, more ferocious heads.
Yeah, well, this is something that I keep on trying to explain to friends when they try to analyze the Israeli political scene, and they say that Bibi Netanyahu is extending the war for his own political gains. And I say, look, he might be gaining politically if the war goes on, but you really think this is the reason that he can ask Israelis to sacrifice their kids and keep on fighting in Gaza? You really think that the Israelis like to see their kids fight and die in Gaza, and and spend all this money and suspend their economy to do this? Sometimes, people don't really understand what it takes for Israel to fight, and this is a huge misconception among the Arabs. They think that Israel is a blood-loving fighter organization, and I'm saying, look, there are not many of them. They're a small number, and they take a hit if they keep on fighting. They know that, and they don't want to see their kids getting killed every now and then. So this is just common sense. And to your question, whether the region or Europe or America would come back, now I know that the majority of Arab countries, Arab governments, the Gulf governments, they're rooting for Trump. And yeah, you don't need me to figure this out. You can tell by just reading what they're saying. And the same thing for the Lebanese. And by the way, when I say the Lebanese, and these Lebanese, most of them might be left-wing people, like I used to be back in Lebanon, and they're rooting for Trump. And the reason they're doing that is that because they feel that Biden and the Democrats, and Obama before Biden, are too appeasing to Iran. And even though the Democrats tend to depict themselves as being the more humane, they just don't care about the humane factor when people are killed by Iran. This is a huge issue that they have. So now I think everyone is rooting for Trump, and if Trump becomes president, everyone thinks that they stand a better chance of fighting Iran. But again, this is not a slam dunk case because many of these Arabs are sick and tired of American inconsistency.
Yeah.
I mean, even with Trump, they can't guess what comes next. There's no organizing principle that says, okay, we, America, have the interest of seeing the Iranian regime gone. Now, unfortunately, after the Iraq and Afghanistan war, we have had in America this weird idea that our primary focus is not to have war. And this is horrible because it's if even if we don't to have war, war might want to have us. If we don't fight, Putin will fight, or the Iranians will fight. So we in America changed war from being a tool that we use against our enemies to an end itself.
Right.
And this means that the enemies will be happy. Look, I mean, this is if America's sitting there folding their hands,
Right.
then let's run at the world. Let's take over Israel or take over Europe or
Yeah.
now the Europeans, I agree, they only act when America acts, but the Europeans have been, they've been under my skin for so many years now. And the reason why is that they always have their, what do you call them? They're obsessed with their contracts. And take the French, for example. When JCPOA was signed, Iran signed a contract of $25 billion with Airbus. And they signed a $5 billion contract with Total, the energy company, to work on the southern Pars field, oil fields in the south. So they have $30 billion of contracts with Iran. Now, these were frozen when Trump came to power, but they were not killed. So they're still there. So as someone who knows the politics of Lebanon, I know that the French have been making nice with Hezbollah since then. They think that if they make nice with Hezbollah, they win brownie points with Iran. And that if, in the off case that one day these American sanctions come off, they have their 30 billion contracts still waiting for them. So this is how France thinks. And I'm sure, the Germans have a similar consideration. So, and this is one of the reasons why all the people who support Trump support him for this thing with NATO. I mean, I support NATO. I think it's a mistake if Trump bails on NATO. I think it's a mistake if we bail out on Ukraine or Israel or any other ally. But the supporters of Trump hate the Europeans, and they probably don't know why. But this is why, the Europeans keep on just doing their thing. When they want defense, they hide behind us. And then,
Right.
when we come to the fight, they start making deals for their own economies. So
Totally.
we really need a president, an American president, who can articulate these things. Just tell the Europeans, listen, China and Russia and Iran are coming after you and us. They're coming after the liberal democracies, and Israel included. Okay, we either form one alliance like the one we used to have during the Cold War, or we'll just be muddling through and losing, and just like another October 7 and maybe January 5. I mean, give whatever date. These guys are not going away. And I'm sure that Hezbollah, if they don't fight this war, I mean, if by any miracle the Europeans and Amos Hochstein, who are meeting, I think, tomorrow in Paris, come up with the idea that Nasrallah has decided to not go to war, in a year, Hezbollah will come to war. In 2 years, they'll come to war.
Right.
So I hope, I mean, I really want whoever it is the president. I'm usually nonpartisan in U.S. politics. I'm focused on foreign policy. Whoever it is, whether Biden is reelected, whether Trump is elected, I want America to go back to the days when we had a strategy, and we're smart about handling the world. When Israel was a close ally, no matter who the prime minister is. I mean, what two countries make their relationship incumbent on whoever is in power? I mean, that's not an alliance. That's gossip.
Exactly.
So I mean, it's torturing me. I'm sure it's torturing many others. But all we can do is just to keep on trying to show policymakers the right way.
Well, and hope that they will act. Maybe this is a part B to that question. What about the Saudis or Jordan as far as partnership in battling this, the head of Iran?
So listen, these guys, they are much more clear-eyed on Iran, and they want to fight Iran, but they cannot afford betting on the wrong horse. So if they bet on America, and midway through America changes course and befriends Iran, they'll be stuck with animosity with Iran for a long time.
Yeah.
And this already happened to them, and the Saudis were burnt, and they couldn't believe that the day came that they just snapped out of the Yemen war. So they hedge what they want. They want this alliance that I'm talking about. They want themselves and Israel and America and the Europeans to be in one big front. Look, they were very instrumental during the Cold War. I mean, the Saudis were there every time America called on them during the Cold War, whether in funding or whatever we wanted them to do, and they'd love to do this again. But who's leading this, right? I mean, the leader of this is not there, or if he's there, he's just too whimsical and strange. So if you if you follow on the Gulf issues and the Yemen war, so we forced the Saudis to stop the war, right? I mean, we twisted their arm. We in America, we twisted their arm. We stopped shipping offensive weapons, and we forced them to stop fighting the Houthis in Yemen. And then when the Houthis started targeting ships, the United States put together this coalition to go after the Houthis. And we knocked on the doors of the Saudis and the Emiratis, and we said, listen, these are your enemies. Don't you want to fight them? And they said, thanks, but no thanks. We're not going into this war. And I remember at the time, I reached out to friends over there, friends who know what's going on with the government. They said, what's happening? It looks like your chance. They said, if they stop, if they change course, we'll be stuck with a war. And that's exactly what happened. A month into the fighting, Jake Sullivan or someone else from Biden's administration went to Oman, secretly met with the Iranians, tried to come up with an arrangement to end the month-old war with the Houthis. And they were right. They were proven right. I mean, we can't be inconsistent over this. If you started a war on Houthis, it means a war to finish off the Houthis, no matter what it takes. You can't start a war only to look good in the optics of it and the photo op behind it. And then when you get all these allies involved, you withdraw, and they're stuck to pick up the bill and keep on fighting with Iran and the Houthis. So
unbelievable. No, please go on.
No,
the consequences
I'm just
are so far-reaching. The consequences here is outrageous.
I'm just giving this example to explain the problem with U.S. inconsistency. We have to be consistent for our allies to trust us and reliable. And as a country that manufactures and sells arms, we have to understand that we are an arms factory, and this benefits our economy, and this is independent of our politics. No one, I have someone who gets me milk once every week, right? Every Tuesday morning, I get milk. If this guy comes on Tuesday and the Tuesday app doesn't show up, I find someone else. No one wants an unreliable supplier. Right. And America tends to do this with our allies. Midway through the war with Yemen, we stopped shipping or selling weapons to the Saudis. Midwar with between Israel and Gaza and Hamas, we stopped shipping whatever bombs because we thought we have some sort of. We can't do that. If we're selling people arms, we have to sell them arms, whether we like it or not. And we have to explain to our constituents that we sell the arms, but we do not foot the ethical bill if you think that these guys are committing unethical things. We are only the suppliers. We sell. So, and that's also inconsistency. So unless we get rid of that, I think the U.S. will keep on facing trouble and leading the world.
And Israel is facing that right at this moment as well.
Israel is not facing. Israel is suffering.
Absolutely.
And the Saudis are suffering. America is huge. It's a superpower. It can change in its minds every now and then. Israel and the Saudis can't, you know?
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
Right. We don't have this luxury. This is not a ideological over there. Everything happens over there, but this is spitting distance. There's no illusions here. This is not a theoretical, we'll get back to you next week. This is an active war for life and death.
Yes.
This is not a tomorrow war. This is not a worry about one day. This is
look,
today now.
even on the Palestinian and the Lebanese side, this is not a war for the death. It doesn't have to be like this. You know, I keep on saying this all the time to all these friends who say, "But why doesn't Israel stop the war?" I say, listen, if we care about Palestinians, if Hamas surrenders, it's over, like now.
Right.
The same applies to Hezbollah, and to my mind, America should join Israel in instructing the Lebanese that we will use an enormous amount of power and force and firepower, or you have to surrender. We don't want you to die. I mean, we have to articulate these ideas. Look, I mean, Lebanon is my dear country. I don't want to see it destroyed. But we have to make these choices. We have to tell these people, you got to stop fighting. You know, I mean, war has to stop. Now, okay, you think it's injustice, you know, you think all these Jews took your land. Fine, you can keep on thinking that, but you can't keep on killing people when you think that. I mean, there's a huge distance between actually disagreeing and, you know, over things and going to war because we disagree. And this is what, you know, this is what I think America should be doing. We should just tell Hezbollah, look, you're not getting away with this. All the power that we have, we'll throw at you. By the way, if you know the Iranian official story, and the friends of Iran here in the US, they have this idea that Iran is Iran like you see it now. Iran is Islamist today because we, the West, hurt them. And, you know, they come up with the Mossadegh CIA coup and whatnot. Now, what they don't tell you is that the reason Iran is still Iran in one shape, the reason why Stalin didn't take the north of Iran in the 1950s, Stalin, you know, he was an expansionist kind of guy. And he believed that there's oil in northern Iran. And he wanted to go in and take that part and just annex it like Georgia or any other country next to him. And what we did, America at the time, I think it's President Truman, he said, do this and there'll be nuclear war. You know, and because, you know, at the time, America thought if we don't stop this guy, he'll just keep on expanding. So we drew a line in the sand and he backed down. And Stalin, and this is why Iran is still in its current shape. Otherwise, its north would have been part of Russia. This is one of the biggest services that America did to Iran, even though, you know, you wouldn't find many Iranians who know this factoid. So this is how things should be. You know, you threaten Putin, look, you want to go to a nuclear war, bring it on, but you have to step back, you know, and we don't want war, and none of us want war. But if that's the way that, you know, you understand things, then, you know, let's fight it out. I mean, what I'm saying is totally not part of the debate in Washington or the West. So hopefully one day we'll go back to debating things properly.
But we won't have a choice. You don't have a
I mean, you know,
we're not given a choice.
Yeah.
Well, right now, you've got 80,000 people in the north. The most beautiful place. My heart aches. The most precious places in Israel. You're sitting in hotels for 9 months.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you know, I'm sorry that you guys have to suffer with this. I mean, what I'm saying is that over here we do have the luxury of just debating, you know, and like I said, I'm not sure how you know the percentage of Americans who are interested in foreign affairs, and even those who are interested, I'm not sure how many of them really understand foreign affairs. So over here, you know, you guys go to sleep in a couple of hours. Our day has just started. We can just close our eyes and live our happy American lives. You can't do that.
But the thing is, Hussain, is I hope so. You know, a lot of times, for years, I've been doing a lot of different human rights activism, and people ask me, and I'm stressed, and I'm, you know, not sleeping, and people say, why? Why do you put yourself through it? It's because I don't think that there is the choice. I am all for America being able to go to sleep and wake up and not worry about the same concerns that Israel's worried about. But that's not the world. That's not the nature of the threats that we face. And it's absolutely
I
illusory.
agree.
Even this whole ridiculous of this America first. Yes, 1000%. You want your leadership to represent your country and your country's needs and all of the factors involved. But this idea that we aren't absolutely intimately connected, this web together, even with sworn enemies, is foolish to imagine. Why is Israel? Why is America even bothering with Israel? Are you serious? Do you nobody's acting altruistically here? The lack of understanding of what these connections mean and how we are buffer into being able to worry about, which of the 20 different cereal brands you buy in the massive supermarkets, we want you to continue that. There's a complete lack of understanding, and it seems really rather deliberate.
I agree. And I think, it makes me nervous the more Hezbollah flags I see marching downtown Manhattan in New York.
Yeah.
Last month there was only one Hezbollah flag on Princeton campus. And this, the last footage that I saw from a few days back, like a dozen Hezbollah flags and Hamas flags. So I agree. I don't think that, I was just trying to depict how the majority of Americans think, but I'm like you. I agree. This threat will never stay in southern Lebanon or in Iran. This is coming here sooner or later. And this has happened all the time. We said the same thing with the Nazis. We thought, what could possibly happen to us? Let them fight it out in Europe. And it came to America. And then, look, Afghanistan and the Iraq war didn't go as good as we wanted them to go. But it didn't mean that radical Islamism didn't find its way to the U.S., right? We've had so many incidents of killings and shootings, but it happened. So, and the same thing will happen with Hamas and Hezbollah. These guys are here. Their flags are here. So these problems, each and every one of us will face now at different, varying degrees. Israel is certainly at the front, but we will face them. And I have no idea how we can convince America to get behind this.
I want to, if you will, just pull you back for one moment to the influence of Syria over Lebanon. I know that's probably a larger topic than you want to start, but just in brief. So after Prime Minister Hariri in 2005 was assassinated, so there was peaceful demonstrations calling for the withdrawal of Syrian troops, right? They, like you said, they've been in there since 1976. And it's a bit of a mystery. I don't imagine many people understand that the Syrian government has sort of long viewed Lebanon as a part of greater Syria. So you've got the Syrian occupation of Lebanon, and they have really a secular ideology, which you mentioned. Then you have Hezbollah coming to the aid of the Assad regime during the Syrian civil war, which killed over 500,000 people. So you've got Hezbollah defending the Syrian regime basically against its own Lebanese population. So can you just maybe fill us in about that strategic relationship between Hezbollah and Assad and their shared interest there?
Just to understand this, the alliance between Iran and the Assad family changed between father and son. When the father, Hafiz, was still alive, he died in the year 2000. Hafiz was in the driver's seat in this alliance, and he dictated what happens in Lebanon, even when there was Hezbollah. So until the year 2000, whatever you saw Hezbollah did, using Iranian money and arms, and of course, whatever they did, it was by permission from Assad. And if he said stop, they stopped. The son didn't understand the dynamics behind it. The way the father did it is that he always balanced off the Iranians versus the Gulf Arabs. He played them off one another, and he walked on the fence and he collected benefits. And he did the same between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And so he was a guy who stood in the middle all the time and made himself beneficial. He knew when to stop and when to do things. And that's why he could, take over Lebanon. And after 1990, he was he was recognized as a legitimate guy in power in Lebanon. I mean, no one came after him in 1990 and said, "Look, the civil war is over. You must withdraw." So he was a smart guy. Now the son didn't understand any of this, and starting 1998, when the father was old and dying, he started taking over Lebanon, and he messed up Lebanon. He messed up the system that his dad had left him. He tried to replicate the Syrian. The Syrian regime is based on military officials and intelligence officials. The Assad, the father, ruled Lebanon by co-opting the oligarchs. So the oligarchs who already enjoy support and popularity were his guys. Now the son didn't understand that part, so he shut down the oligarchs and he tried to replicate his regime by appointing military, and intelligence officers everywhere who reported to him. The oligarchs revolted against him. So this is why, he got ejected, basically. Now, when he lost control over Lebanon, the only strong ally that remained was Hezbollah. Well, Hezbollah can be an ally, but Hezbollah can also act on its own and on Iran's behalf. So you see the balance of power changing gradually from the Assad being in charge to Hezbollah being in charge, first in Lebanon. And then after 2011, when the Syrian revolution broke out, the same dynamic started happening in Syria because Assad was losing territory. He was on the back foot. He had to invite Hezbollah to go in, and Iran. When Hezbollah and Iran went in, every inch of territory that they recovered from the opponents, they kept to themselves. So they never gave the territory back to Hezbollah. So everything south of Damascus is completely under the control of Iran and Hezbollah. And that's why we see the, quote unquote, the Israeli Air Force, or the Air Force that no one knows who runs. Israel never, admits this. But anyway, that's why you see the Air Force taking out these Hezbollah and Iranian targets inside of Syria all the time. These are not Assad targets, by the way. These are pure Iranian arms shipments, and so now you have what you have in Syria is that you have a weak Assad who lives in his own pocket with Russian support, and the rest of Syria, not the rest, at least the south of Syria and the middle of Syria, and parts of Damascus also, is under Hezbollah and Iranian control, all the way to the east. So in the east is where they meet Western Iraq, and this becomes a connection all the way from Iran through Iraq to Syria to Beirut. So this is the bridge that Tehran has, and you have the pocket of Assad, and then you have in the north you have these Islamists who are supported by Erdogan and Turkey, right? So this is how the map looks. So Assad is really not in charge of Syria anymore. And he has this pocket, and even this pocket is, iffy. So he's in charge, but since Putin got into war with Ukraine, he doesn't really give him much attention. So Assad doesn't really run Syria anymore. When October 7 happened, and Hezbollah got involved in the fight on October 8, I think the Emiratis sent Assad a message: don't get involved. Now, I don't think he would have gotten involved anyway. He doesn't have the tools to get involved, and he doesn't have the end product. I mean, he doesn't have the finish. He can't see a finish line. Get involved, then what? And by the way, this is very interesting because at the recent Arab Summit for Gaza, he went there. He didn't deliver a speech, which is so unlike him because he's such a talkative guy. So Assad is not part of the game. He might help Hezbollah from time to time. They might help him, but he's in his enclave. Now, I hear sometimes talking to Israeli friends that he might help, or he could help get rid of Hezbollah in Iran. I disagree. I don't think he can, even if he wanted to. He doesn't have enough manpower to overcome the pro-Iran militias. And they keep on shipping Shia militias from Afghanistan and Iraq. And so in terms of manpower, they outnumber him. And in terms of resources and arms, and also in terms of intelligence, because they surround him. So he's the long answer short is that he's irrelevant at this point.
Thank you for that explanation. Hussain, if you had the ear of the people who are pressing the buttons, so to speak, what is your hope? What would you advise this terribly troubled region in this terribly difficult time?
Reconstruct the Cold War alliance, the Western alliance, believe again in democracy, believe again that this is a fight between democracy and the crazy dictators, whether in Russia, Iran, China. And of course, this is a message also to my fellow Americans who are giving up on democracy, who are believing in the strongman model. I think democracy is our power, and it is Israel's power. No one should give up on democracy. Just reconstruct the democratic alliance, the alliance of democracies of the Cold War, and be patient and consistent. And like we won the Cold War, I think we can beat Khamenei and Putin and Xi. But we need patience, and we need to think of this not as something that's part of the news cycle. We need to think like the generation before us thought in terms of long term, and in terms of we might not see the victory, but our children or our children's children will certainly see the victory.
Amen.
Amen.
I could not add anything more on point than that. I am so grateful for your time, Hussain. I hope you'll join us again. And
Anytime.
honest to goodness, there is no greater answer than the one that which you just gave us, and may it be heard and just reverberate. So may we, and honest, and I will just say that Beirut, that was the Paris, they called it the Paris of the Middle East. I grew up hearing of stories that, and it is my deepest desire that we move forward to those days again.
We'll get there one day. It'll be back hopefully one day, inshallah. Bezrat Hashem. It'll just happen. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Hussain.
Thank you.